So I think both Tom and Phoebe are more than happy to answer questions if anybody has questions.
Yes, but I want to get a concept by the rest of you in the room that do not derive water from the acequia. Our acequia that I'm on takes our water from around the school, goes all the way down to past the post office, Old Coach Road, all the way through this valley. The other acequias predominantly feed the upper part of our community. Should, in the future, this thing move forward, should theoretically they say, we can test for all these contaminants, should they put in a system to do that, should those tests reveal contaminants in the river, I, as a commissioner, will have to shut down my acequia completely. And I'm assuming that every other commissioner will agree with me, because we cannot be liable for distributing that contamination through the valley and ultimately to the Pueblo neighbors who start at Old Coach Road. So I had a question for Rusty. The household owners of these casitas, should they not have some liability on this as well? I assume that this legality is just going towards Auberge, but I'm very interested in that. First part of the question. The second part of the question is, perhaps are they aware if there is a liability? There. Thank you.
John, I can do that.
I actually have the same question.
Yeah, let me just say that the Hills and Villas are victims in this as well. And it's super important that they have rights that are separate from this scenario. So I'm going to be, if you're from there, or you know someone from there, or you know the association there, have them contact me, because we're looking at an action on their behalf. Because in New Mexico, there's a tort, an injury suit called negligent misrepresentation. They didn't have to intend to mislead, but they negligently said, you're going to hook up to our sewer system and you don't have to do on your lot. Someone gave them that advice and it was represented to them, and they've been paying money and paying more money for a system, the system to nowhere at this point that Rusty mentions. So I believe as well, it's not that if this system takes off, yes, they could be with knowledge now that they are sending contaminants in violation of the regulations, and that could open them up to some liability or responsibility. But perhaps we can get ahead of the curve and tell them, you have the same interests as we do. Clean, environmentally positive disposal.
If each of these houses had its own septic tank and leach field system, would that resolve a lot of our problems? I know Bishop's
Can you
Lodge.
repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, is each
If
lot had its own septic system where you could test and know where the contaminants were coming from, would that absolve them?
or their own septic tank and their own leach field
Yeah.
per
Like we
house.
have.
On their
Like
own
we have.
property?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to turn this into a discussion about a different community than our community, but let me just say, one of the important aspects of all these questions is, this is why the liquid waste disposal regulations were adopted. Because the first provision in the regulations is each homeowner is responsible for the safe disposal of the waste they generate. You cannot escape your responsibility for the waste you generate. We all live under that regime. We are all individually responsible for the waste we generate on our property, and we are responsible to make sure that it's taken care of appropriately. This is an effort to end run and circumvent that. That's why it's important, as a matter of good governance, good politics in our community, that we see that the regulations that have been in effect for 20 years are enforced. And they aren't being. They're being gamed. to our disadvantage and to the disadvantage of the homeowners up on top of the hill for the reasons we've talked about here. But who's getting the advantage of this? The lodge.
I understand that part of their discharge is also going to be put onto the land in the way of irrigation. Is any of this addressing that aspect of where this water is going, the treated water is going, not just in the leach field, but onto the land for irrigation?
Yeah, what they're doing to their property is not our concern. I understand. For 4 months out of the year, they want to use this water to irrigate their property. And, we can make every issue a matter of our concern. But the issue that we're focused on is how they are proposing to dispose of their waste in a leach field on Little Tasuki Creek for 8 months out of the year and what that's going to do.
I can speak loudly. I just would like to know, under the lawsuit that's being looking at the neighbors in front of the Environment Department, what is the remedy? So we are, I think, all convinced about the problem, but, we all live in the community, so what is the remedy?
That's a very good question. The remedy is to deny the permit. And if that's the remedy, that's the only remedy we can get from the Environment Department. And if the permit is denied, that means one of two things. They're either gonna have to go back to the drawing board, the new permit application, or find an alternative means of disposal, as you've suggested you do, or others do in the community. And part of that is transportation to an appropriate landfill for disposal. But the remedy is denial of the permit.
So where we are, I'm speaking now from the perspective of Protect Tasuki. We have 3 objectives. We wanted to stop their effort to dump this waste into the creek directly. Our second objective was to ensure that they adopt an environmentally sound solution to the waste problem they've created. As Tom outlined, they've created an enormous waste problem by circumventing these regulations. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. They want us to eat those chickens. Our third objective, and this is critically important, and you asked, are we going to be safe? No, we're not going to be safe, because this tells you what the incentives are and how you can game the system and how complicit our government is in the gaming of that system. So our third objective is to hold the county accountable. How did this ever happen? How did these lots get developed without on-site septic? How was this possible? And when are we going to hold our elected officials accountable to enforce the regulations that are already in place, not to mention improve them to protect the quality of our drinking water? So the remedy, as Tom said, for this particular action is to deny the permit, but that's not the end of our objectives for Protect Tasuki. We go beyond that. We want an environmentally sound solution up there. Denying the permit doesn't give us that. It just makes sure that they don't dump on us. And the third thing we want is to get the government to step up to its responsibility here to protect our interests.
So what if the permit is not denied? What's the contingency regarding that? And then second, is there any federal responsibility? It doesn't sound, there's got to be protections when it comes to the floodplain or riparian areas to build an infrastructure within that. So is there any federal responsibility regarding floodplains?
So I'm going to ask Tom to address the federal responsibility, but I'm going to talk about, so what's plan B? We lose. The permit gets granted. Well, I'm not going to disclose or anticipate, but there is a plan B, and we can deal with that. And Eric alluded to that in a sense when he talked about a cause of action on behalf of the residents up there for misrepresentation. The granting of this permit, particularly under these regulations, does not insulate them from liability for what they're doing. So there is a plan B, but hopefully we never have to get to that.
Yeah, as to and just a footnote to the first part, there's also in addition to an action by the residents for trespass on your property because of the contaminants, there's also an appeal to the Water Quality Control Commission on if the permit were granted, which we would definitely want to pursue. As far as the floodplain issue, I do not know the intricacies of the FEMA regulations and how they affect this. My impression, though, is that it's a local issue, not a federal issue. However, if it's a FEMA type issue, I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I don't know. You know, as part of the application process, that would have been one of the first things the Environment Department would have been required to do, is check all the boxes on floodplains, on, you know, compliance with federal law, on and on and on. So I have no idea what the independent federal law would be on that as far as FEMA is concerned.
I believe even within private land, there are still protections regarding floodplains and riparian areas.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I just don't know what they are, but I do think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Does Bishop's Lodge know what our war chest is? Like, do they know what?
Question is, does Bishop's Lodge know what our war chest is? The answer is, I don't think they care.
Is there a chance that they're dumping right now, you know, other than the solid waste that they're trucking away, could they be dumping at this very moment?
The question is there a chance they're dumping right now other than their solid waste? Because, and the answer is, again, I don't know. I would think that would be highly reckless if they were. Whether their sludge piles have losses, I don't know. I've heard anecdotally that they do. So I'm not entirely sure of that. So is there a chance? That'd be risky business to do that.
One of the first things Tom did was serve public records requests on NMED, the Office of the State Engineer, and the county, so we can find out what they're doing and get an answer to this, because we don't know. Joanna?
And so my question will go to both you and to Phoebe. But something that I promised Eric, that I promised Ryan, that I would say to this group, is that we will address our own waste. What I understand that's going on with the Tesuque Pueblo currently is that they are utilizing runoff water and treating it, and that's part of their water resource. And I think it's our obligation to make sure that none of us have faulty septic systems or have horse manure going into streams. We need to be conscious of our neighbors, because we're going to have to work together. We're under a new administration. We are going to have to work together as a community, because we have to rise up out of this. So, that's something I see. And my question for Phoebe is, I don't know what your knowledge is regarding but we can get some of those test results, from what I understand. And what is your knowledge regarding what will happen with indigenous people if, under the Amat agreement, if there is a shortage of runoff water that they can treat and use for drinking water and use on the Pueblo, what will happen then? So that's one of my questions, because I understand that they have to go into that. Most of us are using the aquifer rather than runoff water, and Native people will need the aquifer if there comes a drought. So we have to be conscious of how we use water as well, because there are people that are not using the level of water that you're getting to your home. And then my question for the attorney is, if we're liable, if we have waste that we're producing that's already going and has been tested regularly since 1993, and I do think that Protect Tesuque should be working with the Tesuque Pueblo. They have so many incredible people there that could help us. And it's we must come forward, and we must also support and work as a community. They have great ideas, and I couldn't even bring it all to you. I think it's, someone should go from Protect Tesuque and represent. I did not represent Protect Tesuque, I went representing myself. What liability do we have with waste going into currently going down through Bishop's Lodge into the creeks? There's currently E. coli in there. And what will you say to Bishop's Lodge when they say to you, I'm sure their lawyers are going to find out about this as well, that there's sewage in there or that there's, untreated stuff in there. So those are my two questions. Sure.
Thank you for that question. There's a lot packed in in that question. At first, I just want to always acknowledge, the Tesuque Pueblo and their sovereignty and their governance and their governor and tribal council, tribal leadership. I know working a lot in the work that I do throughout New Mexico, as well as for a number of different pueblos, including Tesuque, I provide some environmental services to Tesuque on other projects. And just being a Pueblo person, understand the unique dependence and interdependence on surface water and the environmental elements that we depend upon just to be our way of life as Pueblo people. So I just want to all acknowledge that, but I also most want to make sure that the Pueblo speaks on its own behalf, and just reiterate that there probably will be a time when the interaction and engagement with the Pueblo will be supportive and helpful to the overall region and overall watershed. And then as to the Amant settlement and the details, the Amant settlement is very complex. And as we've learned over time, there's a lot of, with those complexities, there's a lot of evolution in how that Amant settlement gets implemented over time. So I wouldn't want to jump into a firm response to like what that would be. I think that's a ongoing question, and it's something, like you said, collectively, it is in everybody's interest to work together. I try to promote that in all the work that I do, is collaboration and cooperation is extremely important. There's also, I mean, just make a quick plea for ongoing engagement. The state of New Mexico is doing what's called the Water Security Planning Act, and they're looking at different regions throughout New Mexico and how surface water and groundwater is going to be looked at for planning and prioritization and project development. So I would also encourage the community to keep an eye out for that. That's coming from the Interstate Stream Commission and OSC. And again, that's another way of collaborating and working together. I like what you shared about, not trying to villainize other community members and community folks here. It's about us all working. So I like that comment that you made about all of us working together. It is so important for our state to work together and to work collaboratively to address issues as we grow, as we have our homes from multiple generations back to Rusty is new from California into our community, and how we evolve and navigate all of that. And I think it's really important to think about that as we continue to move together as a whole through this process. So, and including our Pueblo nations that are our neighbors and also have a lot of knowledge, as well as indigenous knowledge, and also other levers, if you will, other ways of also advocacy. And so like I said, I'm sure when the Pueblo of Tesuque will be, ready to engage, I think that might be another avenue. But I don't want to commit anybody, but just true full working together and engagement, especially with our neighbors of Tesuque Pueblo. Thank you.
In answer to the second question, the current state of the stream bed does not justify in any way, shape, or form the proposal of Bishop's Lodge to compound the discharges into the aquifer underlying that river. So that's my answer to that. Secondly, are we, when you say we liable, well, I think as Rusty pointed out, the purpose of the liquid waste disposal regulations is to impose responsibility on each lot owner. So yes, you're responsible for the waste you generate and how you dispose of those wastes individually. So the we is too broad, but the question is, you know, is there any way that that an enforcement action of a violation of a permit could be brought against an individual because of E. coli being found at some location in the Tesuque River? The answer is probably no. It's not practical. So that issue doesn't concern me. But you do raise an overarching great point that you got to be responsible for what you do, whether it's horses or your own disposal system and all that. You got to take care of the issue yourself. But that doesn't concern me as far as Bishop's Lodge. I mean, I would like them to raise that defense. There's some there already, therefore we get to add to it. That's a great defense. Like it. So bring it on if that's what they want to do.